That was the great Paul Harvey, who's no longer with us. But on the line with us today, we have William J. Federer. Bill, welcome to the John Fredericks Radio Show. You're on with Colonel Mike.
Hey, Colonel Mike. Great to be with you.
It's great to be with you, sir. I'm glad you're coming on the show. I think this is your first time, correct?
Yes, it's an honor.
Oh, well, it's an honor to have you, sir. And many, many years ago, you signed a book to me, America's God and Country, which has all the greatest quotes. And, we look up from time to time the American Minute, which is a website you have, and it gives us our history day by day, what's happened in our country. Bill, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your website, your books, and your background?
Well, sure. Well, thank you, Colonel Mike. My website is AmericanMinute.com. I send out a free daily email called American Minute, something that happened on each date in history. I have a daily television program called Faith in History. It airs on the TCT network over DirecTV. And then a daily radio spot by the name of American Minute airs on a couple hundred stations, the Bot Radio Network and several others. Years ago, I ran for Congress a couple of times and didn't win, but came close, but got a good baptism by fire into how the political process works. And I've written about 20 books, and the feeling is America was founded unique in world history, and we're losing our freedoms. We need to get our memory back. And so one of my favorite quotes is from Arthur Schlesinger Jr., was a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian on John F. Kennedy's staff. And Schlesinger's quote was, "History is to the nation what memory is to the individual." So if you've ever met an individual who has lost their memory, maybe they have Alzheimer's, they forgot who they are, they forgot who you are. Well, guess what? We have national Alzheimer's. Here we are, the freest country that the planet has ever seen. We forgot how we got here. And as a result, we're letting our freedoms get taken away. So it's this passion to sort of re-educate our country to how unique we are in world history.
Well, you heard the clip I played bringing you in. That was Paul Harvey on the signers of the Declaration. He was a great American, and I think we no longer teach history, I don't think, Bill, in the schools today. It's definitely not my generation, that's for sure.
Well, we don't, and there's actually a communist tactic called deconstruction, and it's where you separate the people from their past, get them into a neutral where they do not remember where they came from, and then you can brainwash them into the future you have planned for them. Sort of a cultural DNA genetic therapy. Take out the old DNA and put in a new. It's a sales technique. So if I were a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I would do is say negative things about the toothpaste you are currently using. You're still using that old stuff. Don't you know it'll eat the enamel off your teeth? Ooh, you're repulsed by it. Now I got you into a neutral. You're open-minded. What are all the toothpastes out there? And then I give you my pitch for this brand-new tartar-controlled breath freshener stuff. Well, that's what they do. They go into classrooms and they tell the students negative things about the founding fathers. They took land from Indians, sold people into slavery, and were chauvinists. And, ooh, the students are repulsed by them. Now you got the kids into a neutral. They're open-minded. What are all the belief systems out there? Then you give them your pitch for socialism or LGBT or Islam. And we see Europe went through this. Europe went from a Judeo-Christian past, right, Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, and Jewish neighborhoods, to a secular neutral with the French Revolution and Napoleon spreading all the French secularism around that, hey, anything goes, free sex, LGBT. And now Europe is entering an Islamic future, with Muhammad being the number one name for newborns in London, Milan, Brussels, Berlin.
And Sweden.
And so we see
Sweden.
Sort of a culture going from drive neutral reverse, like a car.
Right.
And so we've gone from a Judeo-Christian civilization to a secular anything goes. Everybody does what's right in their own eyes. And now we're entering an Islamic future. And we see, I wrote a whole book on the history of Islam. There's a 1,400-year history of how Islam takes over other cultures and other civilizations. And people forget Egypt used to be completely Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by Mark that wrote the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, until Amir ibn al-As conquered Egypt. Syria used to be completely Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. The name Christian was first used in Syria. until Caliph Umar conquered it. There used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa in the 7th century. St. Augustine of Hippo was from Carthage that's Tunisia, until the Umayyad Muslims conquered it. Then they conquered Spain, held it for 700 years, and then they conquered Turkey. And anyway, I go through all the history there. But when you stand back and look at culture, you see trends. And the trend for Western civilization is from Judeo-Christian to secular anything goes to Islamic. And those that want to maintain our Western civilization with values such as everybody's equal, because we're all made in the image of a creator, then we need to remind ourselves of this history.
Well, Bill, I think you're doing a great job. You did write many, many books. If anybody wants to look them up online, it's AmericanMinute.com. How many years you've been doing this now?
Well, my first book came off the press in 1994, and it's called the book that you mentioned, America's God and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations.
Yes.
And by God's grace, it sold over 500,000 copies.
Wow.
And we've had judges quote out of it, congressmen quote out of it. We've, at Focus on the Family, sell a couple 100,000 copies. But it's just a collection of all these quotes, and it's easy to use. So it's alphabetical with Abigail Adams at the front and, Washington at the back.
I forgot what convention or wherever I was that I met you when you autographed one book to me. It was so long ago. I think it was probably around 94, 95 back then. But
it's been a whirlwind. But we see people are waking up on one side, and the other side, it's like they're making a mad dash for the gate, trying to hurry up and take away our freedoms before we come out of our comatose state.
Well, they use the terminology, Bill. The terminology is what? Progressive, right? And progressive is just the granddaughter of or the grandson of communism. It started way back with Wilson's era, back in the turn of the last century. So what we and remember, the communists always said, "We'll get you from within," and that's what they're doing right now. Whatever people think about this fake Russian dossier or whatever, for sure, the biggest problem is not communism outside as much as one party inside, which they call themselves progressive now. That's the big issue, I think, in our country.
Well, it is. One of the things I compiled was political tactics. And one of them is called psychological projection. Sigmund Freud, a psychologist, coined the term where a rude person calls everybody else rude. A hateful person calls everybody else hateful. Matter of fact, they'll even put up a website where they list everybody that they hate. And so this is a strategy where you accuse your opponent of what you're guilty of. David Axelrod was President Obama's campaign manager. And on NPR radio, he said, in Chicago politics, we have a tradition where you throw a brick through your own campaign office window and then call a press conference to accuse your opponent. So in other words, if you are colluding with the Russians, maybe getting $145 million in exchange for a fifth of the U.S. uranium, you want to accuse your opponent of what you are guilty of. So it's playing defense by playing offense. You want to, and so everybody's looking at your opponent, you get a free pass. And if the attention's ever turned back on you, by that time the water's so muddy, the public is confused, and you get a pass.
It's actually the truth. And, you've never seen this in our history. I don't think you've ever seen this, Bill. In our history, have you ever seen such a fight put up when someone is duly elected and becomes the president? Never. Did you ever see this?
I think I totally agree with you, and I think it's because the people that are going after him are covering their own rear, so to speak.
Yeah, CYA.
In other words,
CYA.
They are complicit in the corruption, and so they don't want the focus to be put on them, and so they're going to continually try to. Little kids do this. I'm not the mean one. You're the mean one.
Right.
But
I think it's much more serious.
Bullies do this. Wife beaters do this. Well, you provoked me, so I'm going to beat the tar out of you. Aggressor nations do this. They say, well, you offended us, so we're going to invade your country and take over. It's some little pretense that's an excuse for the other side to become aggressive. And but what we're looking at is world power, and so whoever controls America more or less influences the entire planet. And so that's the struggle we're seeing played out here. And it's a polarity change from a bottom up to a top down. And I just wrote a book last year called Who is the King in America?
I'm looking at that on the web right now. Yes.
It's one of these books where, sort of ambitious, I go through all of recorded human history from the beginning of the invention of writing around 3300 BC, Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley. Today that's Iraq. And so what do these records show? They show the most common form of government is a king. And Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger and bigger until at the time of the founding of America, the King of England was the most powerful monarch on the planet. He controlled 13 million square miles, 500 million people, all of India, a quarter of the world's population right there, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, and America. And America's founders decided they didn't like this globalist king telling us what to do, so they flipped it and made the people the king. And so it's a polarity change from a top-down to a bottom-up. And so in my book, I go through where did America's founders get this idea that they could rule from the bottom up. It actually came from New England. It actually came from these pastors founding Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And what did these pastors do? They went back to ancient Israel. So today is the anniversary of Israel becoming a modern nation. Well, when you look back at ancient Israel, when they came out of Egypt around 1400 BC, they were the first nation without a king. Oh. First nation in all of recorded history with no king. So the time they came out, Egypt had 2,000 years of pharaohs. China had 5,000 years of emperors. Indian Maharajas, King Aga, Bashan, the African chieftains, the world's ruled by kings. And when Israel comes out of Egypt for 400 years, they do not have a king. They're ruled by something called the law. Okay. And the law says there's no respect of persons in judgment. Rich or poor, everyone is to be treated the same. Mm-hmm. This is the beginning of the concept of equality on planet Earth. Because wherever there's a king, if you're friends with the king, you're more equal. If you're not friends with the king, you're less equal. And if you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason, or you're a slave.
Exactly.
So all of society is how close of a relationship could you get to the guy at the top. Mm-hmm. And Israel had no guy at the top for 400 years. It was ruled by the law, and the law says there's no respect of persons in judgment. Rich or poor, everyone is to be treated the same, male, female, made in the image of the Creator. And then Israel was the first nation with private land ownership. Mm-hmm. Because wherever there's a king, you never really own the land. It's always conditional of you staying on the nice side of the king. You cross the king, he'll take away the land and kill you. In Israel, the land was permanently titled to each family. If they got in a pinch and sold it every 50 years, the land reverted back to that family. Mm-hmm. This prevented a dictator from gathering up the land and putting the people back into slavery. Now, if you own land, you can accumulate stuff. The Bible called that being blessed. Karl Marx called it being a capitalist. Right. You got stuff, you worked hard and saved it, right? Israel was the first nation with no standing army. You have a king, he has an army to enforce his will. In Israel, every man was in the militia and armed and ready at a moment's notice to defend his family and his community. Israel had a bureaucracy-free welfare system. So in Egypt, people were selling their souls to the Pharaoh for a bag of grain. In Israel, when people harvested their field, they left the gleanings, the corners, for the poor people to pick through, like Ruth. Mm-hmm. This way, the poor were taken care of without some political leader collecting everything and doling it back out to those who can help him stay in power. And then Israel was the first nation that could read. I thought this was fascinating. Only 1% of Egypt could read.
Really?
They had 3,000 hieroglyphs, and the scribes kept them complicated on purpose as job security. It was their secret knowledge.
Oh, like American civil servants.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the communication of the deep state. Only reading and writing was only for the upper class. When Moses comes down the mountain, he does not just have the law. He has the law in 22 characters. So easy to learn. Kids could learn how to read. No longer is reading and writing the elites, communication. Everybody could read. So Israel was a bottom-up form of government where every citizen is educated and moral, and the big kingpin that made it all work. And so the thought is you've got a spectrum of power. One side's total government, the other side's no government. Total government, you have a king who rules by fear. You do what he says or he kills you. The other side is no government. Well, that would be anarchy unless each citizen had knowledge of the law. It's like everybody downloads a behavioral app on their iPhone. Mm-hmm. Instead of telling you where to turn, it tells you how to act, right? But wait a second, why would you follow it? What would motivate you to follow an internal moral? Ancient Israel had the key ingredient. There is a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he's going to hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal, nobody's around, you know you can get away with it, and then you think, God is watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing, and it creates something in the back of your head called a conscience. If everybody in the country believes this, you can maintain complete order with no police, maximum liberty and maximum security. And so this was Israel's system. They go from 400 years of slavery, and they're totally illiterate. They're a mob. And suddenly they get downloaded this complete package system, and it works for 400 years until the priests stopped teaching the law, and then every man did what's right in their own eyes, and the rubber band snaps back, and they went to get King Saul. But this is the period that America's founders looked toward, and all the Puritan and New England colonies, all their pastors are studying this ancient Israel system.
Bill, we got to get you back on again. We're coming down to the last minute. I'd love to get you back on again and continue on this. This is a great conversation.
Well, hey, I'm honored to be on, and again, today is the anniversary of Israel becoming a modern state. And so with that, the book, Who is the King in America, goes through how ancient Israel influenced America's founders. And I think the listeners would find it fascinating.
Thank you so much.
AmericanMinute.com is my website.
Bill, thank you for coming on the John Fredericks Radio Network.
Well, thank you, Colonel Mike.
All righty, bye now.
Colonel.